Hey folks, before the video starts, please leave a like and subscribe to cheer me up. Make sure you are relaxed and enjoy today's stories. I bought a dark web manual on Astral Projection. Now I'm stuck outside my body. Hey Reddit, I've never posted anything like this before, but I need to get it out. Maybe someone here can help me, or at least understand what I'm going through. My name is Nick, and a few months ago, I bought a manual on Astral Projection from the dark web. I know, stupid as hell, but at the time, I was desperate. I'd been into all kinds of supernatural stuff for years, but nothing really worked. Ouija boards, seances, you name it, they were all just games. I wanted something real. The manual wasn't cheap, and it came with a warning. Once you start, there's no turning back. Typical dark web scare tactics, right? I should have heeded it. It started with simple meditative exercises, things I'd done before. I had to focus on my breathing, imagine myself floating, stuff like that. But the deeper I got into the manual, the more intense it became. There were chants, symbols to draw on my skin, and strange concoctions to drink. It felt like a mix of ancient rituals and something far darker. One night, after a particularly intense session, I felt something shift. It was like I was vibrating at a different frequency. My body was heavy, pinned to my bed, but my mind was racing. Then with a jolt, I was out, floating. I could see my own body lying there, motionless. It was the most surreal experience I'd ever had. At first, it was exhilarating. I could go anywhere, see anything. I flew over cities, through walls, even into people's homes. It felt like I had discovered the ultimate freedom. But then, I started noticing things. Dark shadows that seemed to move just at the edge of my vision. I could feel them watching me, following me. One night, I decided to explore an old abandoned house on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of place that kids dared each other to enter, all boarded up and crumbling. In my astral form, I didn't think twice. I floated through the walls and started looking around. That's when I saw it. A figure, hunched over in the corner, scratching at the walls. It looked human, but its limbs were twisted and elongated. Its skin was pale and translucent, like it had been drained of blood. I tried to leave, but it turned and looked directly at me. Its eyes were hollow pits, and its mouth stretched into an unnatural grin. I felt a cold hand grip my astral form, and suddenly I was being pulled back, violently. I snapped back into my body with such force that I jolted upright in bed, drenched in sweat. That night was just the beginning. Every time I left my body after that, I saw more of them. The twisted figures, the shadows. They were always there, waiting. I started waking up with scratches and bruises that I couldn't explain. My friends noticed I was acting strange, but what could I tell them? That I was being haunted by things I couldn't even name? I tried to stop. I really did. But it's like the more I fought it, the stronger the pull became. One night, after another brutal encounter with the shadow things, I decided to destroy the manual. I thought if I got rid of it, maybe the nightmares would stop. But as I tore it apart, I found something hidden in the back. A final page, written in a language I couldn't understand. There was a symbol at the bottom, one I recognized from my sessions. I knew it was important, but I had no idea what it meant. That's when the real horror began. I started waking up in places I didn't remember going to. My room would be trashed, furniture overturned, windows shattered. and the scratches and bruises got worse. They started to look like words, but scrambled, nonsensical. I was losing chunks of time, hours where I had no memory of what I'd done. Then last week, I woke up to find my girlfriend Sarah standing over me. She looked terrified. She told me I'd been speaking in a voice that wasn't mine, saying things that didn't make sense. I was talking about gateways and sacrifices, things I'd never even thought about. She begged me to get help, but how could I explain any of this to a doctor? That's when I realized I wasn't alone in my body anymore. Something had followed me back from my Astro trips, and it was getting stronger. I could feel it pushing against my consciousness, trying to take control. Sometimes, when I looked in the mirror, I could see it in my eyes, a flicker of something dark and malevolent. I'm writing this now because I don't know how much longer I can fight it. If anyone out there knows anything about astral projection or dark entities, please, I need your help. I don't know how to stop this, and I'm scared of what will happen if I lose control completely. Hey Reddit, it's Nick again. I wish I could say things have gotten better, but they haven't. If anything, they've gotten worse. Much worse. After my last post, I got a flood of messages, some supportive, some skeptical. A few people claimed to have gone through something similar, but none of their advice worked for me. I've been losing more time. The gaps in my memory are getting longer and more frequent. Sarah moved out. She said she couldn't handle the way I've been acting, and honestly, I can't blame her. The last straw for her was waking up in the middle of the night to find me standing over her, whispering in that same guttural voice. She said my eyes were black, like bottomless pits. A part of me feels relieved that she's gone. At least she's safe. But now I'm alone, and that means there's no one here to stop me if whatever is inside me takes over completely. I've tried staying awake, guzzling coffee and energy drinks, but I can't keep this up forever. I'm exhausted, and I can feel it wearing me down. Last night, something happened that I can't explain. I woke up in the basement, covered in dirt. My hands were raw and bloody, and there was a hole in the concrete floor. I had been digging with my bare hands. I don't know why or what I was looking for, but there was something down there. A small black box. It was locked, and I had no key. The moment I touched it, I felt a surge of energy like static electricity coursing through my body. I've kept the box in my room since then, but I'm afraid to open it. I have a feeling it's connected to the entity somehow, but I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I've been hearing whispers too, not just when I'm asleep, but all the time. They're faint, like a radio tuned to a distant station, but they're getting louder. They speak in that same ancient language, the one from the final page of the manual. I tried reaching out to some of the people who messaged me after my first post, but no one's responding anymore. It's like they've all disappeared. Or maybe I'm the one disappearing. I'm not sure of anything anymore. I went back to the abandoned house, thinking I could find answers there. The moment I stepped inside, I felt like I was being watched. The air was thick with a malevolent presence. The walls were covered in scratches, like something had been clawing to get out. I heard the whispers there too, louder than ever. They seemed to be coming from all around me. I turned a corner, and there it was, again, the twisted figure from my first astral projection. Only this time, it wasn't just a shadow. It was solid, real, and it was grinning at me. I ran. I don't even remember how I got home. but I did. Now I'm afraid to go outside. I keep all the lights on, but the shadows are still there, moving just out of sight. The bruises and scratches have turned into deep gashes, and I'm afraid of what I'll find next time I wake up. I don't know how much longer I can do this. I'm scared to sleep, scared to stay awake. I can feel the entity growing stronger, taking more control. It's like a parasite, feeding off my fear and despair. Sometimes I catch glimpses of it in the mirror, a dark, shadowy figure standing behind me, grinning with those hollow eyes. I found an old journal in the basement, hidden behind a loose brick. It belonged to the previous owner of this house, a man named Thomas. He wrote about strange occurrences, about feeling like he was being watched. His last entry is the most disturbing. I made contact. It's inside me now. God help me, it's inside me. I think whatever this thing is, it's been here for a long time, moving from person to person. I don't know how Thomas dealt with it, but I don't think he survived. There's a crude drawing at the back of the journal, the same symbol from the manual, the one I can't decipher. It must mean something, but I don't know what. I'm reaching out here because I'm desperate. If anyone has any knowledge of the ancient symbols, dark entities, anything, please help. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. The entity is getting stronger, and I'm getting weaker. I'm scared of what will happen if it takes over completely. Hey, Reddit, it's Nick again. I don't know how many people are still following this, but I need to keep writing. It's the only thing keeping me sane. Things have gotten worse, way worse. After finding Thomas's journal, I thought I could find some answers, but it's only opened up more questions. I've been trying to piece together the symbols and the whispers, but I'm not getting anywhere. The black box I found is still locked, and I've tried everything to open it, prying it, smashing it, even trying to pick the lock, but nothing works. The more I try, the more I feel this dark energy radiating from it, like it's alive. I've started seeing things, not just in my dreams or astral projections, but in the real world, shadows moving in the corners of my eyes, shapes that vanish when I turn to look at them. I'm hearing footsteps at night, slow and deliberate, like someone's pacing just outside my bedroom door. I'm afraid to leave my room, afraid to sleep, afraid to do anything. Yesterday, I woke up with blood on my hands. I had no idea where it came from, and when I checked myself in the mirror, there were no new cuts or wounds. It wasn't until I went downstairs that I found the source. My cat, Mittens, was lying in the living room, her throat slit. I don't remember doing it, but I know it was me. Or rather, it was the entity using my body. The guilt and horror are eating me alive. I tried contacting Sarah to tell her what's been happening, but she's blocked my number. I don't blame her. She deserves to be safe, away from this madness. I just wish I could explain it to her, make her understand that it's not really me. I've been researching non-stop, trying to find anything that could help. I found a few forums dedicated to the occult and supernatural, but most of them are just full of wannabe witches and bored teenagers. Then I came across a thread about possession and exorcism. One user, going by the name of The Watcher, seemed to know what they were talking about. They mentioned something called the veil, a barrier between our world and the astral plane. According to them, when you astral project, you weaken the veil, allowing entities to cross over. I messaged the Watcher, explaining my situation, and they responded almost immediately. They told me that I had made a grave mistake by using the dark web manual. They said that manuals like that are written by those who want to weaken the veil for their own purposes, to let entities through. The only way to stop it, according to the Watcher, is to find the original author of the manual and make them reverse the process. The Watcher warned me that this would be dangerous. These people are not just dabblers in the occult. They're deeply entrenched in dark practices, and they won't take kindly to someone trying to undo their work. But I don't have a choice. If I don't do something, this entity will consume me completely. Using the information the Watcher gave me, I traced the manual back to a man named Samuel Black. He's a reclusive figure, rumored to be involved in all kinds of dark rituals. I found an address for him, a rundown house in the middle of nowhere, about 3 hours from where I live. I'm going to go there tonight. I don't know what I'll find, but I have to try. Before I go, I need to tell you about something else. The entity, it's not just a shadow or a twisted figure anymore. It's taking form. When I look in the mirror now, I can see it behind me, more solid and real than ever. It's taller than me, with elongated limbs and fingers that end in sharp claws. Its skin is a sickly gray, stretched tight over its bones, and its eyes, God, its eyes are empty voids that seem to suck in all the light around them. The worst part is, it's starting to speak. Not just the whispers, but actual words. It tells me things, horrible things. It tells me that I belong to it now, that I'll never be free. It tells me that it's hungry, and that it wants more than just my soul. Last night, I heard it laughing, a low guttural sound that echoed through the house. I don't know if I'll make it back from Samuel Black's house, but I have to try. If you don't hear from me again, remember my story. Don't mess with things you don't understand, and for God's sake, stay away from the dark web. Hey, Reddit, it's Nick again. I managed to make it to Samuel Black's house, but I'm not sure I'll ever be the same. This might be my last post. I feel like my time is running out, but I need to get this down before it's too late. Samuel Black's place was a nightmare right out of a horror movie. It was a decaying, isolated mansion surrounded by overgrown woods. The windows were boarded up, and the whole place reeked of decay. As I approached, I felt the air grow colder, thicker, like it was suffocating me. I knew I was walking into something terrible, but I had no other choice. I knocked on the door, but there was no answer. I tried the handle, and to my surprise, it opened. The inside was even worse than the outside. The walls were covered in strange symbols, similar to the ones in the manual. The floor was littered with bones and decayed carcasses of small animals. The smell was overwhelming, a mix of rot and something metallic, like blood. I called out for Samuel, but the only response was the creaking of the old house settling around me. I walked further in, flashlight in hand, trying to ignore the feeling that I was being watched. The place was a maze of dark hallways and rooms filled with bizarre artifacts, jars of what looked like preserved organs, old books with pages that seemed to writhe and change under the light, and mirrors that reflected twisted, distorted versions of reality. I found Samuel in the basement. He was sitting in a circle of candles surrounded by more symbols. He looked up as I entered, and I could see he was expecting me. His eyes were dark, filled with a kind of knowing madness. "I know why you're here," he said, his voice raspy and weak. "You've made a grave mistake, boy." I explained everything, the manual, the entity, the things I'd seen and done. He listened, nodding occasionally, as if confirming his own suspicions. "You've torn the veil," he said. "You let something through that should never have been disturbed." He told me that the entity attached to me was an ancient spirit, one that feeds on fear and despair. Once it latches onto a host, it doesn't let go until it's consumed them completely. He explained that the symbols in the manual, the rituals, were designed to weaken the veil and make it easier for entities to cross over. He said that the only way to send it back was to perform a reversal ritual, but it would require something precious, a life force. I knew what he meant, and I was willing to do whatever it took. I asked him to teach me the ritual, and he agreed, but he warned me it wouldn't be easy. The entity would fight back, and I'd have to be strong enough to withstand it. We spent hours preparing. Samuel drew intricate patterns on the floor with a mixture of salt and ash, and we chanted in that ancient language, invoking powers I didn't understand. He gave me a dagger, its blade inscribed with runes, and told me that I'd have to cut myself to offer my blood to the ritual. As we began, I felt the entity's presence grow stronger. The air became suffocatingly thick, and shadows seemed to close in around us. Samuel started the incantations, and I followed along, my voice shaking. The symbols on the floor glowed with an eerie light, and I felt a sharp pain in my chest, like something was trying to tear its way out. Then the entity appeared. It was more solid than ever, towering over us with those hollow eyes and twisted grin. It spoke in a voice that shook the walls, telling me that I was a fool, that I belonged to it now. I could feel it pulling at my soul, trying to drag me into the darkness. Samuel shouted for me to make the offering. With trembling hands, I sliced my palm and let the blood drip onto the symbols. The pain was intense, but it was nothing compared to the sensation of my life force being drained. I could feel the entity's rage, its desperation as it tried to cling to me. The light from the symbols grew blinding, and the entity let out a scream that shook the entire house. I felt a force pulling it away, tearing it from my body. It fought, clawing at me, but the ritual was too strong. With a final, agonizing shriek, it was ripped away, vanishing into the darkness. When it was over, I collapsed. Samuel helped me up, but I could see he was weakened too. He told me that the entity was gone, but the damage it had done would never fully heal. The veil was still weak, and I'd always be vulnerable to the things on the other side. I thanked him and left, barely able to walk. The drive home was a blur, and now I'm back in my room, writing this. The house feels empty, quieter than it's been in months. The shadows are gone, and the whispers have stopped, but I can still feel a lingering presence, a reminder of what I went through. I don't know what's next. Maybe I'll move away, start fresh somewhere new. Maybe I'll keep looking for ways to strengthen the veil, to make sure this never happens again. All I know is that I'm not the same person I was before all this started. I've seen things, done things that have changed me forever. Thank you to everyone who reached out, who believed me. Stay safe and don't mess with things you don't understand. The darkness is real, and it's always waiting. Hey Reddit, it's Nick. This will probably be my last post. I wish I could tell you everything is better now, that I've moved on and am living a normal life. But that's not the case. The entity might be gone, but the scars it left behind are deeper than I could have imagined. After leaving Samuel Black's house, I tried to resume my life. I moved to a new apartment, got a new phone number, and tried to cut ties with anything related to the supernatural. For a while, it seemed to work. I started seeing a therapist to help me deal with the trauma, and I thought I was getting better. But then, a few weeks ago, I started having nightmares again. Not the same ones as before, but close. I'd see flashes of the entity, hear its whispers in my dreams. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, convinced it was back. My therapist said it was just my mind processing the trauma, that it would get better with time. But I'm not so sure. Last night, something happened that's making me question everything. I was out with some friends, trying to distract myself, when I felt a familiar chill. I turned around and saw someone watching me from across the bar. It was a man, tall and thin, with dark eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. I couldn't shake the feeling that I knew him, but I couldn't place where from. When I got home, I found a note slipped under my door. It was a single piece of paper with a symbol drawn on it, the same symbol from the manual, from the final page. My heart sank. How could this be happening again? I burned the manual, destroyed the ritual site. It should have been over. I went to bed, trying to convince myself it was just a prank, maybe someone from Reddit messing with me. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. I woke up around 3 a.m., the witching hour, to the sound of scratching at my window. My heart raced as I got up to check, and there it was, a twisted figure, grinning at me from the other side of the glass. It was different from the entity, smaller, more human-like, but no less terrifying. It had the same hollow eyes and sickly gray skin. It mouthed something, but no sound came out. I stumbled back, and when I looked again, it was gone. I spent the rest of the night with every light in the apartment on, clutching a kitchen knife, praying it wouldn't come back. This morning, I called Samuel Black. It went straight to voicemail. I left a desperate message, begging him for help, but I'm not sure he'll get it. I don't know where else to turn. I've reached out to the Watcher again, but they haven't responded. It feels like everyone who could help is just gone. I'm terrified, Reddit. I thought I was free, but it's clear now that whatever I did, whatever ritual we performed, it wasn't enough. Maybe the entity left something behind, a piece of itself that's still tethered to me. Or maybe there are more of them, waiting for their chance to cross over. I don't know. I've been trying to stay awake, but the exhaustion is getting to me. I can feel it pulling at my mind, dragging me down. The shadows are back, more pronounced than ever. They move with purpose, and I swear I can hear faint laughter sometimes. The entity might be gone, but the darkness is still here, lingering, waiting for me to slip up. I don't know what to do anymore. If anyone has any ideas, anything at all, please tell me. I'm running out of options, and I'm scared of what will happen if I fall asleep again. Thank you for listening, for believing me. I don't know what's coming next, but I'll keep fighting. If I disappear, or if you don't hear from me again, remember my story. Be careful with what you seek, because you might just find it. And once you open that door, it's almost impossible to close it again. Stay safe, Reddit. The darkness is real, and it's always watching. I ordered a special delivery from the dark web. It was a human. I've always had a curiosity about the dark web. You know, the kind of morbid fascination that leads you down rabbit holes at 3 a.m. I read stories, watched videos, and even took a few tentative steps into the shadowy corners of the internet. But it wasn't until a few months ago that I decided to really dive in. What I found there changed my life forever, and not in a good way. It started innocuously enough. I was browsing through one of the many forums, reading threads about various illegal services and products. Most of it was drugs, fake IDs, and the occasional hacker for hire. But one post caught my eye. Special delivery, real deal, no questions asked. The description was vague, promising a unique and unforgettable experience. My heart raced as I clicked the link. The site was simple, almost bland compared to the flashy and chaotic pages I had seen before. There was a list of items, each with a price and a short description, but one stood out. Human package, $10,000. It was ridiculous, right? Some kind of sick joke. But the more I read, the more it seemed like this was something real. The seller promised absolute discretion and a life-altering experience. I laughed it off at first, but the thought gnawed at me. Days turned into weeks, and I couldn't get it out of my head. Eventually, my curiosity got the better of me. I had some savings, enough to cover the cost if this turned out to be real. So, with a mix of excitement and dread, I placed the order. I didn't expect anything to come of it, but a part of me hoped it was all an elaborate prank. About 2 weeks later, a package arrived at my door. It was massive, taking up most of my front porch. My heart pounded as I dragged it inside. The box was plain brown cardboard, with no markings except for my address. It was heavy, too, far heavier than I expected. I grabbed a box cutter and sliced through the tape, my hands trembling with anticipation and fear. As I lifted the lid, a smell hit me, a rank, pungent odor that made me gag. Inside was a black plastic bag, sealed tightly. I hesitated, the reality of what I was doing crashing down on me, but it was too late to turn back now. I cut through the bag, revealing its contents. I'll never forget the sight that greeted me. There, curled up in the fetal position, was a man. He was naked, his skin pale and covered in grime. His eyes were closed, and for a moment I thought he was dead. Panic set in as I checked for a pulse. It was faint, but there. He was alive, barely. My mind raced. What the hell was I supposed to do now? Call the police? No, I'd be arrested. Take him to a hospital. Too many questions. I was in way over my head, but I couldn't just leave him like this. I dragged him out of the box and laid him on my living room floor. He was thin, almost emaciated, with bruises and cuts all over his body. It looked like he'd been through hell. I ran to my bathroom and grabbed a first aid kit, doing my best to clean his wounds. As I worked, he stirred, his eyes fluttering open. They were a piercing blue, filled with a mixture of fear and confusion. He tried to speak, but his voice was weak and hoarse. I could barely make out his words. Help me. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by his side, trying to make him as comfortable as possible. I gave him water, small sips at a time, and tried to get him to eat. He was too weak to tell me much, but the few things he did say were haunting. He'd been kidnapped, held captive in some kind of underground facility. He didn't know where or by whom. His captors had told him he was being sold, but he had no idea to whom or why. As the night wore on, he fell into a fitful sleep. I sat there, my mind racing with questions. Who were these people? Why had they sent him to me? And most importantly, what was I going to do now? The next morning, I decided I needed to get some answers. I logged back onto the dark web, retracing my steps to the forum where I'd found the original post. It was gone, as if it had never existed. Panic set in. I had no way to contact the seller, no way to find out who this man was or where he'd come from. I was on my own. I spent the next few days trying to nurse him back to health. He was slowly gaining strength, but it was clear he'd been through severe trauma. He had nightmares, waking up screaming in the middle of the night. He'd lash out if I got too close, his eyes wild with fear. I did my best to reassure him, but it was clear he didn't trust me or anyone. One night, about a week after he'd arrived, I woke to find him standing over me. His eyes were wide, his face twisted in a mask of rage. "Why did you buy me?" he screamed. "What are you going to do to me?" I tried to calm him down, but he was beyond reason. He lunged at me, his hands wrapping around my throat. I fought back, managing to shove him off me. He stumbled, falling to the floor. For a moment, he lay there, gasping for breath. Then he started to sob. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I don't know what's real anymore." I helped him back to the couch, where he curled up in a ball. I sat beside him, feeling utterly helpless. This wasn't just some dark web curiosity anymore. This was a living, breathing human being, one who had been through unimaginable horrors, and now his fate was in my hands. As I watched him sleep, I knew I had to find a way to help him. But where could I turn? The police were out of the question, and I couldn't just abandon him. I needed to find the people responsible for this, to get answers, and to make them pay for what they'd done. But I had no idea where to start. The dark web was a maze, and I was just one person who had made a terrible mistake. And now I was in way over my head. I had no idea how to help him, or where to even start. I spent hours scouring the dark web, trying to find any trace of the seller or the forum where I'd made the purchase, but it was like they'd vanished into thin air. Days turned into weeks, and I became increasingly desperate. The man, who I'd started calling Alex, although he never confirmed if that was his real name, was growing stronger physically, but mentally, he was still shattered. One night, as I sat in front of my computer screen, a notification popped up. It was an anonymous message from an encrypted address. "Looking for answers? Come to the warehouse on 9th and Elm at midnight. Come alone." My heart raced as I read the message. This could be a trap, but it was the first lead I'd had since Alex arrived. I couldn't ignore it. I told Alex I had to go out for a bit, and made sure he was comfortable before I left. He barely acknowledged me, lost in his own world of pain and fear. I grabbed a flashlight and a small pocket knife, more for comfort than protection, and headed out. The warehouse was in a run-down part of town, surrounded by abandoned buildings and overgrown lots. As I approached, I saw a single light flickering inside. My gut screamed at me to turn back, but I pressed on. I needed to know the truth. Inside, the warehouse was dark and musty, with only the faint glow of the light guiding my way. I called out, my voice echoing in the emptiness. "Hello? Is anyone here?" A figure stepped out of the shadows, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. It was a man, tall and thin, with a hood pulled up over his head. "You're looking for answers," he said, his voice low and gravelly. I nodded, my throat dry. "Who are you? Do you know about Alex?" The man chuckled. "I know a lot of things, but first, you need to understand what you've gotten yourself into." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device, handing it to me. "This is a burner phone. I'll contact you with more information. For now, go home. and keep an eye on your friend." Before I could ask any more questions, he turned and disappeared into the darkness. I stood there for a moment, clutching the phone, my mind racing. This was my only lead, and I had to follow it, no matter how dangerous it seemed. When I got back home, Alex was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV. I sat down next to him, my mind still reeling from the encounter. "Alex, I need you to trust me," I said. "I'm trying to find out who did this to you. I'm going to make them pay." He looked at me, his eyes hollow. "They're everywhere," he whispered. "They're watching us." I didn't sleep that night, keeping the burner phone close. Around 3 a.m., it buzzed with a new message. "Meet me at the old motel on Route 22. Tomorrow night. Bring the package." I stared at the screen, my stomach nodding. They wanted Alex. But why? I knew I couldn't trust these people, but what choice did I have? I needed answers, and this was the only way to get them. The next evening, I prepared for the meeting. I told Alex what was happening, and he seemed surprisingly calm. "I'll go with you," he said, his voice steady. "I need to know the truth." We drove out to the old motel, the tension between us palpable. The place was a dump, long abandoned and falling apart. We parked out front and waited. After a few minutes, a car pulled up, and 2 men got out. They looked rough, with hard faces and cold eyes. One of them approached us, a sneer on his lips. "You brought the package," he said, looking Alex up and down. "Good, follow us." They led us into one of the motel rooms, which had been set up as some kind of makeshift office. Papers and photos were scattered everywhere, and a laptop sat on the table, its screen glowing with encrypted messages. The man who had spoken to me in the warehouse was there, his hood still up. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chairs in front of the table. We sat down and he began to speak. "You've stumbled into something far bigger than you realize," he said. "The people who did this to Alex are part of a massive human trafficking ring. They kidnap people, break them, and sell them to the highest bidder. You were just one of many buyers." My blood ran cold. "Why did they send him to me?" I asked, my voice shaking. The man leaned forward, his eyes piercing. "You were a test. They wanted to see how far you would go, if you'd report it, or if you'd keep him. You're not the only one. There are others." He pulled out a file and handed it to me. Inside were photos of other victims, each more disturbing than the last. My stomach churned as I looked through them, my mind barely able to process what I was seeing. "We're trying to take them down," the man said, "but we need your help. You have access to their network now. You can get us inside." I looked at Alex, his face a mask of pain and determination. "I'll do whatever it takes," I said, my voice firm. "I want these bastards to pay for what they've done." The man nodded. "Good. We'll be in touch. And remember, trust no one. They're always watching." As we drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of eyes lurking in the shadows. The more I learned, the deeper the rabbit hole seemed to go. And now, I was a part of it. Whether I liked it or not, I had to see this through. Not just for Alex, but for all the other victims. I had to bring these monsters to justice, no matter the cost. The days that followed were a blur. I spent most of my time glued to my computer, following the instructions from the burner phone. The anonymous man, who I'd started calling Shadow in my head, was relentless. He fed me information about the trafficking ring, its members, and their operations. It was like piecing together a horrifying puzzle, each piece more grotesque than the last. Alex was a ghost in my house. He rarely spoke, spending his days staring out the window or pacing the halls. He was still haunted by his ordeal, and I could see the toll it was taking on him. But there was a flicker of determination in his eyes, a desire for justice that mirrored my own. One night, I received another message. We've located one of their safe houses. We need you to plant this device inside. Attached was a photo of a small, nondescript house in the suburbs and instructions on how to install a tracking device. I knew this was dangerous, but there was no turning back now. I told Alex what I had to do, and to my surprise, he insisted on coming with me. I can't just sit here anymore, he said, his voice steady. I need to do something. We drove to the address, our hearts pounding. The house looked innocent enough, but I knew what horrors it concealed. We parked a few blocks away and made our way on foot, sticking to the shadows. I had the device in my pocket, my fingers gripping it tightly. As we approached the house, I could see figures moving inside. I gestured for Alex to stay back, and he nodded, his face set in grim determination. I crept up to the side of the house, my heart hammering in my chest. The instructions had said to place the device near the back door, so I made my way there, moving as quietly as I could. Just as I was about to plant the device, I heard a noise behind me. I turned to see a man standing there, his face twisted in a snarl. "What the hell are you doing?" he growled. Before I could react, he lunged at me, knocking me to the ground. The device slipped from my hand, skidding across the pavement. I struggled to break free, but he was too strong. Just as he raised his fist to strike me, Alex appeared, swinging a piece of wood. He struck the man in the head, and he crumpled to the ground unconscious. "Come on, we have to go," Alex said, his voice urgent. He grabbed the device and shoved it into my hand. "Finish it." My hands were shaking, but I managed to plant the device where it needed to go. We ran back to the car, my heart racing with adrenaline. As we drove away, I could see lights flickering on in the house. They'd find the man soon, and they'd know we were here. We didn't have much time. When we got home, I sent a message to Shadow, telling him the device was in place. His response was immediate. "Good. Now we wait." The next few days were tense. I kept checking the burner phone, waiting for updates. Alex was a nervous wreck, pacing the house and muttering to himself. I did my best to reassure him, but the truth was, I was just as scared. Finally, Shadow sent another message. "We've got a lead. Meet us at the warehouse tonight." We arrived at the warehouse to find Shadow and his team waiting. They looked grim, their faces set in hard lines. "We've identified a key player in the ring," Shadow said, handing me a photo. It was a man, middle-aged, with cold, calculating eyes. His name is Victor. He's one of the top enforcers. If we take him down, we can cripple their operations. My blood boiled as I looked at the photo. This was one of the people responsible for Alex's suffering, for all the suffering. "What do you need us to do?" I asked, my voice steady. Shadow outlined the plan. Victor would be meeting with some of his associates at a remote location. Our job was to intercept him and extract information about the ring's operations. It was dangerous, but it was our best shot at taking them down. That night, we prepared for the operation. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that hung over me. This was it, our chance to strike back. But the stakes were higher than ever, and the risk of failure was immense. We arrived at the meeting location, a desolate warehouse on the outskirts of the town. Shadow and his team took up positions around the building, while Alex and I waited in the car. My heart was pounding, my palms slick with sweat. I looked at Alex, and he gave me a determined nod. "We can do this," he said, his voice firm. When Victor and his men arrived, we moved into position. Shadow's team took out the guards silently. One by one, Alex and I crept inside, sticking to the shadows. We found Victor in a back room, surrounded by his associates. Shadow gave the signal, and we moved in. The fight was brutal. Victor's men were well trained, but we had the element of surprise. Alex fought like a man possessed, his rage fueling his every move. I focused on Victor, determined to take him down. We grappled, trading blows, until finally I managed to knock him to the ground. Shadow's team moved in, securing the room. Victor was bound and gagged, his eyes burning with fury. "You'll never get away with this," he spat. "We already have," I said, my voice cold. "Now, you're going to tell us everything." The interrogation was long and grueling. Victor resisted at first, but eventually he broke. He gave us names, locations, and details about the trafficking ring's operations. It was more information than we could have hoped for, and it was enough to bring them down. As we left the warehouse, I felt a sense of grim satisfaction. This was far from over, but it was a start. We had struck a blow against the monsters who had hurt Alex, who had hurt so many others, and I knew we wouldn't stop until they were all brought to justice. But as we drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes watching us, of danger lurking in the shadows. The deeper we went, the more perilous this journey became, and I knew that the worst was yet to come. The days following Victor's capture were a whirlwind of activity. Shadow and his team were relentless, using the information we'd extracted to dismantle parts of the trafficking ring. It felt good to be making progress, but the danger seemed to grow with every step forward. Alex was changing too. He was more focused, more driven. The fear that had gripped him was still there, but it was tempered by a fierce determination. He was becoming a key part of our operations, using his knowledge of the ring's inner workings to help us strike where it hurt most. One night, Shadow called me with urgent news. "We've located their main hub," he said. "It's a compound out in the countryside, heavily guarded. This is our chance to take them down for good." My stomach nodded. This was what we'd been working toward, but the risks were enormous. "What's the plan?" I asked. "We're going in tonight," Shadow replied. "We'll need everyone. This is an all-or-nothing operation." We spent the next few hours preparing. Alex was unusually quiet, his face set in grim determination. "You don't have to come," I told him, my voice soft. "You've done enough." He shook his head. "I need to see this through," he said. "For all the others." We drove to the compound in silence, the weight of what we were about to do pressing down on us. The place was a fortress with high walls and armed guards patrolling the perimeter. Shadow's team had managed to get us inside information, but it was still going to be a tough fight. We arrived just after midnight, parking a few miles away and making our way through the woods on foot. The night was pitch black, the only sounds the rustling of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. My heart pounded as we approached the compound, every shadow seeming to conceal an enemy. Shadow signaled for us to halt, his face illuminated by the faint glow of a tactical flashlight. "We're splitting into 2 teams," he whispered. "Team 1 will create a diversion at the front gate. Team 2, which includes you and Alex, will enter through a side entrance and secure the main building. I nodded, my hands slick with sweat. This was it. The operation began with a series of explosions at the front gate. The guards scrambled, their attention diverted. Shadow signaled for us to move, and we crept along the perimeter, finding the side entrance. It was unguarded, just as our intel had suggested. We slipped inside, the darkness swallowing us. The air was thick with tension as we made our way through the hallways, our footsteps echoing softly. We reached the main building without incident, and Shadow's team took up positions around the entrances. "Go," Shadow whispered, and we burst through the doors, weapons drawn. The interior was a nightmare. The main room was filled with cages, each one holding a terrified, emaciated person. The smell of urine and sweat was overpowering, and the sound of sobbing filled the air. My heart wrenched as I looked at the faces staring back at us, their eyes hollow with fear. Shadow's team moved quickly, securing the room and freeing the captives. Alex and I stayed close to Shadow, our eyes scanning for any sign of danger. Suddenly, a door at the back of the room burst open, and a group of armed men stormed in. "Get down!" Shadow shouted, and we dove for cover as gunfire erupted. The fight was brutal and chaotic. Bullets ricocheted off the walls, and the air was filled with the sounds of shouting and gunfire. I fired blindly, my heart pounding with terror. I saw Alex struggling with one of the guards, his face twisted in rage. He managed to knock the man to the ground, grabbing his gun and turning it on the others. After what felt like an eternity, the gunfire ceased. The room was silent, except for the moans of the wounded and the sobs of the captives. Shadow and his team had subdued the guards, and the compound was secure. But the victory was short-lived. As we started to gather the captives, a series of alarms began to blare. "We've got company," Shadow said, his face grim. "Reinforcements are on the way." We moved quickly, guiding the captives out of the building and towards our vehicles. The night was filled with the sounds of approaching engines, and my heart raced with fear. We were so close to freedom, but it felt like the world was closing in on us. Just as we reached the edge of the compound, a group of SUVs screeched to a halt in front of us. Armed men poured out, their faces masked, and their guns trained on us. "Drop your weapons," one of them shouted. We were trapped. There was no way out. My mind raced, trying to think of a way to save Alex, to save these people, but it was too late. The leader of the group stepped forward, his eyes cold and calculating. "You've made a big mistake," he said, his voice dripping with malice, "and now you're going to pay for it." He gestured to his men, and they began to advance. My heart pounded, and I felt a surge of despair. We had come so far, fought so hard, and now it was all about to end. Just then, a deafening roar filled the air, and the ground shook beneath our feet. The leader's eyes widened in surprise, and he turned just in time to see a massive explosion tear through the compound. Flames shot into the sky, and the sound of shattering glass filled the night. Shadow's team had planted explosives throughout the compound, a last-ditch effort to cover our escape. The chaos provided the distraction we needed. We took advantage of the confusion, rushing towards the SUVs and overpowering the remaining guards. We piled into the vehicles and sped away, the compound burning behind us. My heart pounded with a mixture of fear and relief. We had done it. We had struck a blow against the trafficking ring, and we had freed their captives. But the cost had been high, and the danger was far from over. As we drove through the night, I glanced at Alex. His face was streaked with dirt and sweat, but there was a fierce determination in his eyes. We had won this battle, but the war was far from over. The trafficking ring was vast and powerful, and they would come after us with everything they had. But we were ready. We had faced the abyss and come out stronger, and we would not stop until every last one of those monsters was brought to justice. The price of truth was steep, but it was a price we were willing to pay. The days after the compound raid were a blur of planning and preparation. We knew the trafficking ring would retaliate, and we had to be ready. Shadow and his team worked tirelessly, using the information we'd gathered to track down the remaining members of the organization. The deeper we dug, the more we realized how vast and insidious the network was. Alex and I became closer during this time, bonded by our shared mission. The horrors he had endured had left deep scars, but he was determined to fight. Every night, we would sit together, going over plans and strategies, driven by the same unrelenting need for justice. Then one night, Shadow called us with urgent news. "We found their leader," he said, his voice tense. "He's holed up in a mansion on the outskirts of the city. This is our chance to take him down." My heart raced. This was it, the final confrontation. The man who had orchestrated so much suffering was within our reach, but I knew it wouldn't be easy. The mansion was heavily guarded, and the risk of walking into a trap was high. We spent the next few days preparing. Shadow's team gathered intel, mapped out the mansion, and planned our approach. The night of the operation, the air was thick with tension. We moved in silence, our hearts pounding with anticipation. We arrived at the mansion just before midnight. It was a sprawling estate, surrounded by high walls and patrolled by armed guards. We split into teams, each with a specific objective. Alex and I were tasked with infiltrating the mansion and capturing the leader. We crept along the perimeter, avoiding the guards and slipping through a side entrance. The interior was opulent, a stark contrast to the horror it concealed. We moved through the hallways, our footsteps silent on the plush carpet. As we approached the central office, we heard voices. Shadow signaled for us to halt, and we listened. The leader was there, giving orders to his men. My heart pounded as I recognized his voice from the recordings we'd heard, cold, calculating, and utterly devoid of remorse. Shadow gave the signal, and we burst into the room, weapons drawn. The leader's eyes widened in surprise, but he quickly regained his composure. "So, you finally found me," he said, a smirk on his lips. "But it's too late." He pressed a button on his desk, and salams blared throughout the mansion. Guards poured into the room, and chaos erupted. Shadow's team engaged the guards, gunfire echoing off the walls. I focused on the leader, determined to take him down. We fought through the chaos, the room a blur of violence and noise. I managed to knock the leader to the ground, but he was stronger than he looked. We grappled, trading blows, until finally, I managed to pin him down. "Why?" I shouted, my voice trembling with rage. "Why did you do this?" He laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "Because I could. Because people like you are too weak to stop me." I felt a surge of fury and tightened my grip. But before I could do anything, Alex stepped forward, his face a mask of rage. "No more," he said, his voice steady. "You're finished." With a swift motion, Alex struck the leader, knocking him unconscious. We secured him with cuffs, making sure he couldn't escape. The battle around us was winding down, Shadow's team overpowering the remaining guards. When the dust settled, the leader was in custody, and the mansion was secure. We had won, but the victory felt hollow. The horrors we had uncovered, the lives destroyed, it was overwhelming, but at least now, justice could be served. As we left the mansion, the sun was rising, casting a golden glow over the scene. Alex and I stood together, the weight of everything we had been through settling over us. We had done it. We had brought down the leader of the trafficking ring, but the scars remained, a constant reminder of the darkness we had faced. In the weeks that followed, we worked with authorities to dismantle the rest of the network. The leader's capture led to a series of arrests, and the trafficking ring was finally broken. The survivors, including Alex, began the long process of healing. Alex and I stayed close, our bond forged in the fires of our shared ordeal. We found solace in each other, a sense of purpose in helping the survivors rebuild their lives. It was a long, difficult journey, but we faced it together. Looking back, it all felt like a nightmare, one I was relieved to wake from. But the truth was, the darkness was still out there, lurking in the shadows. We had struck a blow against it, but the fight was far from over, and we would be ready. Because in the end, it wasn't just about revenge or justice. It was about making sure that no one else had to suffer as Alex had. About shining a light into the darkest corners of the world and refusing to let the monsters win. As we moved forward, I knew one thing for certain. We had faced the abyss and survived. And together, we would continue to fight, no matter what the cost. I watched a dark web livestream and saw myself being tortured. I'm writing this because I need to get it off my chest. I know it sounds crazy, but please, just hear me out. I swear, everything I'm about to say actually happened. I'm not sure how much time I have left before they find me again, so I'll get right to it. It all started a few months ago. I was on one of my usual late-night internet binges, clicking through weird forums and obscure websites. I've always had a fascination with the dark web, not for anything illegal, just the curiosity about what lies beneath the surface of the internet. I had heard all the stories about red rooms and human experiments, but I never really believed any of it was real. One night, I stumbled across a link on a forum. It was buried deep in a thread about urban legends. The link was cryptic, just a series of random letters and numbers. Without thinking much of it, I clicked on it. My screen went black for a moment, then a message appeared. Welcome to the Theater of Pain. The name sent a chill down my spine, but my curiosity got the better of me. I entered, and the screen loaded to what looked like a live stream. The video was dark, grainy, like something out of a horror movie. In the center of the frame was a single chair, and on that chair, a person was tied up. Their head was covered with a black bag, and they were completely motionless. I thought it was some kind of sick joke or performance art at first. There were hundreds of comments scrolling on the side, most of them in languages I couldn't understand, but a few were in English. They were all cheering and egging on whoever was running the show. Then the camera zoomed in, and I saw something that made my blood run cold. The person tied to the chair was wearing the exact same clothes I was wearing that night. A black hoodie, ripped jeans, and a pair of old Converse sneakers. It was uncanny. I felt a knot in my stomach, but I told myself it was just a coincidence. Suddenly, a figure stepped into the frame. They were wearing a mask, something grotesque and inhuman, like a twisted version of a clown. They carried a large knife, and the audience went wild. The masked person walked over to the tied-up figure and ripped the bag off their head. That's when I saw it. The person in the chair was me. I know it sounds impossible, but I'm telling you, it was me. The same face, the same hair, everything. I was staring at myself, tied to that chair, looking terrified out of my mind. My doppelganger struggled and screamed, but it was like no one could hear him. Or me. The masked figure circled him, taunting him with the knife, drawing out the terror for the sick pleasure of the viewers. I tried to close the browser, but my computer wouldn't respond. I pulled the plug, but the screen stayed on, locked onto that horrific scene. The masked figure began cutting into my double's flesh, slow and deliberate. Blood poured from the wounds, soaking the chair and the floor beneath. The screams were guttural, primal. I could feel the pain, even though I knew it wasn't happening to me. I don't know how long I sat there, paralyzed with fear and disbelief. Every cut, every scream felt like it was happening to me. The masked figure never spoke, just went about their gruesome work with a methodical precision. They carved symbols into the flesh, symbols I couldn't understand, but felt deeply wrong, like they were ripping at the fabric of reality itself. Eventually, the figure stopped and looked directly at the camera, directly at me. They tilted their head, as if they knew I was watching. The comment section exploded with excitement, and I saw a message flash across the screen. Time to join the fun. The screen went black, and my computer finally shut down. I was left in my dark room, shaking and drenched in sweat. I thought it was over, just some twisted nightmare that I'd wake up from. But then my phone buzzed. I picked it up and saw a message from an unknown number. It was a picture of me, taken from outside my window. I ran to the window and looked out, but saw nothing, just the empty street and the faint glow of streetlights. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst. I grabbed my keys and bolted out of the house, not even sure where I was going. I just needed to get away, to be anywhere but there. Since that night, I've been on the run. I've changed my number, my appearance, everything. But no matter where I go, they always find me. I still get those messages, those pictures. They're always one step ahead, always watching. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. I don't know who they are or what they want, but I do know one thing. They won't stop until they have me in that chair. Until they've made my worst nightmare a reality. I'm writing this as a warning. Stay away from the dark web. You have no idea what kind of horrors are lurking there, waiting to pull you in. And if you ever see yourself on the screen, run, and never look back. I couldn't sleep for days after that night. Every creak of my apartment, every shadow that moved in the corner of my eye, I was convinced they were there, watching. I didn't dare go back to my place. I knew it wasn't safe. Instead, I spent my nights in cheap motels, constantly moving, never staying in one place for more than a day. I changed my appearance as best as I could, shaved my head, grew a beard, switched out my usual clothes for anything that would help me blend in. One night, I was in this dingy motel on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where the carpet is sticky and the air smells like mildew and despair. I double-checked the locks on the door and wedged a chair under the handle for good measure. I lay on the lumpy bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself I was safe, at least for the moment. I must have dozed off because I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't recognize the number. My hand shook as I picked it up and opened the message. It was a video this time. With trembling fingers, I hit play. The screen showed my apartment, my living room to be exact. The camera panned slowly, methodically, across the room. There was something chillingly familiar about the way it moved, like whoever was holding it knew the place intimately. Then it stopped at the door to my bedroom, my sanctuary. The door creaked open and the camera entered, revealing my bed and me asleep in it. I sat bolt upright, my breath coming in shallow gasps. It was me, all right, down to the scar on my left cheek. I watched as the figure on the screen slept peacefully, oblivious to the danger creeping closer. The camera moved to the side of the bed, and I could see the masked figure standing there, knife in hand. The figure leaned in, and I heard a voice whisper through the phone speaker, distorted and low, but unmistakably menacing. "We're closer than you think." The video ended abruptly, leaving me in a cold sweat. I threw the phone across the room, my mind racing. How was it possible? How could they be in my apartment when I was here? Was it a trick, some kind of elaborate ruse to mess with my head? But the details were too perfect, too precise. They knew things no one else could. I needed help, someone who could make sense of this nightmare. I thought of my friend Jake, a tech whiz who'd always been into hacking and the dark web. If anyone could figure this out, it was him. I grabbed my things and headed to his place, hoping he wouldn't think I was completely insane. Jake lived in a small apartment downtown, a cluttered mess of computer parts and energy drink cans. He opened the door, eyes bleary from too many late nights. But when he saw the look on my face, his expression turned serious. "What the hell happened to you, man?" he asked, stepping aside to let me in. I told him everything, from the dark web link to the video I'd just received. He listened without interrupting, his face growing paler with every detail. When I finished, he sat back, running a hand through his messy hair. "Shit, that's some next level fucked up," he said finally. "Let me see your phone." I handed it to him, and he plugged it into his computer, typing furiously. Minutes passed in silence, the only sound the clacking of keys and the hum of his PC. Finally, he turned to me, his face grim. "Whoever did this is good. Like, really good. They covered their tracks well, but there's something familiar about their methods. I've seen this kind of work before, in forums and hacker communities. They call themselves the Puppeteers. Nasty group, rumored to do all sorts of sick shit for money. But this is personal." "Why me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Jake shook his head. "I don't know, man. But if they've got this kind of access, they could be anywhere. They're probably watching us right now." A cold shiver ran down my spine. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like a rabbit in a trap. Jake started packing up his gear, throwing things into a backpack. "We need to go off the grid," he said. "No phones, no internet. We'll figure out a plan, but first, we need to disappear." We left Jake's apartment in a hurry, ditching our phones and any traceable electronics. Jake had a cousin who owned a cabin in the woods, far away from any prying eyes. It wasn't much, but it was the best option we had. The drive there was tense, both of us scanning the road for any sign of danger. When we finally arrived, the cabin was just as isolated as Jake had promised, surrounded by dense forest, It felt like the kind of place you could hide forever. For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could outsmart them. But that night, as I lay on the couch in the dark, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over, that no matter where I went, they would always be one step ahead, always watching, always waiting to pull me back into their twisted game. I drifted off to sleep, haunted by the thought of what might come next. I had no idea how much worse things were about to get. The first few days at the cabin were uneventful, which was a relief. Jake and I kept a low profile, making sure to avoid any unnecessary risks. We stayed indoors during the day, only venturing out at night to gather firewood or check for signs of anyone following us. It was peaceful in a way, but the underlying tension never went away. Every sound, every rustle of leaves felt like a potential threat. Jake spent most of his time tinkering with a makeshift security system. He rigged up motion sensors and cameras around the perimeter, linked to an old laptop he'd brought along. It wasn't much, but it gave us some semblance of control. I tried to help, but my mind kept drifting back to that live stream, to the horror of seeing myself tortured on screen. It was a nightmare I couldn't escape, no matter how hard I tried. One night, about a week into our stay, we were sitting by the fireplace trying to relax. Jake had managed to find a bottle of whiskey stashed away in the cabin, and we were sharing it, trying to take the edge off. The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows on the walls. It was almost cozy, like a scene from a different life. "I've been thinking," Jake said, breaking the silence. "Maybe we should go to the authorities. This is way beyond anything we can handle on our own." I shook my head. "They'll think we're crazy. Besides, whoever these people are, they've got connections. They knew exactly where I was, down to the smallest detail. We go to the cops. We're signing our death warrants." Jake sighed, taking a long swig from the bottle. "Yeah, I figured you'd say that. But we can't keep running forever, man. Sooner or later, they're gonna catch up to us." Before I could respond, a loud beep echoed through the cabin. Jake's eyes widened, and he bolted to the laptop. The motion sensors had picked up something. We watched the grainy black and white footage, our hearts pounding. There, just beyond the tree line, a figure moved, barely visible in the darkness. They were wearing a mask. "Shit," Jake muttered, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "They found us." Panic surged through me. We grabbed what little we had, a couple of flashlights, a hunting knife we found in a drawer, and Jake's makeshift security gear. We had to leave, but the only way out was through the woods. We had no choice. We slipped out the back door, moving as quietly as possible. The night was pitch black, the only light coming from our flashlights, casting eerie beams through the trees. Every step felt like it echoed for miles. We could hear them behind us, their footsteps, the crunch of leaves underfoot. They were getting closer. We ran, our breath ragged and our hearts pounding. Branches scratched at our faces and arms, the cold air burning in our lungs. Jake's flashlight flickered and died, leaving us with just one light to navigate the treacherous path. The masked figures were relentless, their presence a constant looming threat. After what felt like hours, we stumbled upon an old abandoned cabin deep in the woods. It was decrepit, the windows boarded up, and the door hanging off its hinges, but it was our only chance. We scrambled inside, barricading the door as best we could. The place was filled with dust and cobwebs, the air thick with decay, but it was shelter. We crouched in the darkness, listening to the sounds outside. They were close, so close we could hear their voices, distorted and eerie, like something out of a nightmare. They circled the cabin, testing the walls, trying to find a way in. We held our breath, praying they'd give up and move on. Hours passed, or maybe just minutes. Time seemed to stretch in the oppressive darkness. Eventually, the noises faded, and we dared to hope they had lost interest. But we knew better than to let our guard down. We had to stay vigilant. As the first light of dawn filtered through the cracks in the walls, we dared to move. Jake rigged up a temporary alarm system around the cabin, just in case. We were exhausted, but sleep was out of the question. We took turns keeping watch, scanning the forest for any sign of movement. The next few days were a blur of fear and paranoia. We barely spoke, the weight of our situation hanging heavy over us. Jake was constantly on edge, checking and rechecking his makeshift security system, while I kept a lookout, my nerves frayed to the breaking point. Then on the third night, it happened. I was dozing off, my head resting against the wall, when I heard a noise. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, more insistent. I shook Jake awake and we listened, our hearts pounding. The noise was coming from the laptop. We approached it cautiously, the screen flickering to life. A new message had appeared, just a single line of text. Enjoying the show. Before we could react, the screen changed to a live feed. It was inside the cabin. Our cabin. The camera panned slowly, revealing every detail. The broken furniture, the boarded up windows, and finally, us. Jake and I stared at the screen in horror, watching ourselves in real time. How are they doing this? Jake whispered, his voice shaking. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that we were trapped, watched by unseen eyes. The feed zoomed in on us, the camera focusing on our terrified faces. And then, the screen went black. A new message flashed across the screen. We're closer than you think. Panic set in. We grabbed our things, ready to bolt, but the door burst open before we could move. They were there, masked figures flooding into the cabin, their presence overwhelming. We fought, but it was futile. They overpowered us, dragging us outside. I struggled, my vision blurring with fear and rage. I could hear Jake shouting, cursing them, but it was all in vain. They bound our hands and forced us to our knees. One of them, the leader I assumed, stepped forward. He wore the same grotesque mask from the live stream, and he held a knife, glinting in the moonlight. "Welcome to the theater of pain," he said, his voice cold and devoid of any emotion. "Tonight's performance is just for you." The last thing I remember was the knife descending, pain exploding through my body, and the sound of Jake's screams blending with mine. The world went dark, and I knew, deep down, that this was just the beginning of our nightmare. I woke up in a place that felt like a twisted version of reality. The room was cold and sterile, the walls a stark, clinical white. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly glow on everything. I was strapped to a chair, my wrists and ankles bound tightly. Panic surged through me as I struggled against the restraints, but they held firm. Across from me, in another chair, was Jake. He looked as terrified as I felt, his eyes wide with fear. His mouth was gagged, and I realized with a jolt that mine was too. The taste of the rough cloth was bitter and metallic, probably from the blood. I could feel the dried, crusted blood on my lips and cheeks. A door creaked open, and the masked figures filed in. their presence oppressive and menacing. The leader, the one with the grotesque clown mask, stepped forward, the knife still in his hand. He took his time, savoring our fear, his eyes glinting behind the mask. "Welcome back," he said, his voice a chilling monotone. "We've been waiting for this moment." He nodded to one of the others who wheeled in a large monitor and set it up in front of us. The screen flickered to life, showing a live feed of the room. It was like looking into a twisted mirror, seeing ourselves bound and helpless, our terror reflected back at us. The leader circled us, the knife glinting menacingly. "We are going to have a little fun tonight. Our audience has been eagerly anticipating this performance." I struggled against my restraints, my mind racing for a way out, but there was nothing I could do. I was completely at their mercy. The leader started with Jake. He cut away the gag, and Jake immediately started begging, his voice hoarse and desperate. "Please, let us go. We haven't done anything to you." The leader ignored him, drawing the knife slowly across Jake's arm, not deep enough to do serious damage, but enough to draw blood. Jake screamed, the sound echoing off the walls. The audience in the livestream chat went wild, their comments flashing across the screen in a frenzy of excitement. "Pain is such a fascinating thing, isn't it?" the leader mused, as if discussing the weather. "It reveals so much about a person, their limits, their fears, their true nature." He continued his slow, methodical torture, carving shallow cuts into Jake's flesh, each one eliciting a fresh scream. I tried to shut it out, but there was no escape from the horror. Every cut, every scream, tore at my sanity, making the nightmare feel more real. When he finally turned his attention to me, I felt a cold dread settle over me. He removed my gag, and I tried to steel myself, but the fear was overwhelming. He started with the same slow cuts, the pain sharp and searing. I gritted my teeth, trying not to give him the satisfaction of hearing me scream, but it was futile. The pain was too much, and I found myself crying out, the sound raw and desperate. The leader leaned in close, his breath hot against my ear. "You see, pain is just the beginning. It's the gateway to something much deeper. We are going to break you, piece by piece, until there's nothing left." Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Time had lost all meaning. The torture was relentless, a constant barrage of pain and fear. My body was a canvas of cuts and bruises, each one a testament to the cruelty of our captors. Jake had passed out at some point, his head lolling to the side, but I was still conscious, still aware of every agonizing moment. Just when I thought I couldn't take any more, the leader stepped back, wiping the blood from his knife. "I think that's enough for now. We don't want to break our toys too soon, do we?" He nodded to the others, and they unstrapped us from the chairs, dragging us to a small windowless cell. They threw us inside, locking the door behind us. The room was dark and damp, the air thick with the smell of mold and decay. Jake was still unconscious, his breathing shallow and ragged. I crawled over to him, my body protesting with every movement. "Jake," I whispered, shaking him gently. "Jake, wake up." He stirred, his eyes fluttering open. Where are we?" "We're in a cell," I said, my voice trembling. "We need to get out of here, find a way to escape." Jake nodded weakly, but it was clear he was barely holding on. We huddled together, trying to draw strength from each other. The darkness was oppressive, the silence broken only by the distant sounds of our captors preparing for the next round of torture. I don't know how long we stayed like that, but eventually, the door creaked open again. Two of the masked figures entered, dragging us to our feet. We were too weak to resist, too broken to fight back. They led us down a dimly lit corridor, the walls lined with grotesque images and symbols, like something out of a nightmare. They brought us to another room, this one filled with cameras and monitors. The leader was there, waiting for us, his mask a permanent mocking grin. He gestured to the cameras, the red lights blinking ominously. "Our audience is growing impatient," he said, his voice dripping with sadistic glee. "They want more. They crave more." He turned to us, his eyes cold and merciless. "And we're going to give it to them." The next hours were a blur of pain and terror. They filmed everything, our screams and pleas echoing through the room, broadcast to their sick, twisted audience. Every cut, every burn, every broken bone was recorded, a testament to their cruelty. By the time they were finished, we were barely alive, our bodies broken and battered. They dragged us back to the cell, leaving us to rot in the darkness. I lay there staring at the ceiling, my mind numb from the pain. Jake was barely conscious, his breathing shallow and labored. I knew we couldn't take much more of this. We had to escape, or we were going to die in this hellhole. But how? We were weak, broken, with no idea where we were or how to get out. As I lay there, a desperate plan began to form in my mind. It was risky, almost certainly doomed to fail, but it was the only chance we had. I whispered to Jake, telling him my plan, and he nodded weakly, his eyes filled with a glimmer of hope. We waited, biding our time, gathering what little strength we had left. The next time they came for us, we would be ready. It was a slim chance, but it was all we had. The hours dragged on in that dark, damp cell, every minute feeling like an eternity. Jake and I were both on the edge of consciousness, our bodies racked with pain and exhaustion. But we held on to the fragile thread of hope that our plan might work. When the door finally creaked open again, it was almost a relief. The two masked figures entered, their movements methodical and practiced. They dragged us to our feet, ignoring our feeble attempts to resist. My heart pounded in my chest as we were led back down the dimly lit corridor, past the grotesque images and symbols that adorned the walls. We were brought into the same room as before, the one filled with cameras and monitors. The leader was waiting for us, his mask a hideous, permanent grin. He gestured to the cameras, the red lights blinking ominously. "Welcome back," he said, his voice dripping with sadistic glee. "Tonight's performance is going to be unforgettable." As they strapped us back into the chairs, I felt a surge of desperation. This was our last chance. We had to make our move now, or we'd never get another opportunity. I glanced at Jake, and he nodded subtly, signaling that he was ready. The leader stepped forward, his knife glinting in the harsh light. "Let's begin," he said, his voice cold and devoid of any humanity. I took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of strength I had left. As the leader leaned in to start his sadistic work, I kicked out with all my might, my foot connecting with his knee. He stumbled back, momentarily caught off guard. Jake seized the moment, ripping free from his restraints with a surge of adrenaline. Chaos erupted. We fought like cornered animals, driven by sheer desperation and the will to survive. The other masked figures lunged at us, but we were fueled by a primal need to escape. I grabbed the knife from the leader's hand, slashing wildly at anyone who came near. Blood splattered across the room. the monitors flickering with the live feed of our struggle. Jake tackled one of the masked figures, wrestling him to the ground. I turned my attention to the leader, who was regaining his composure. He lunged at me, but I dodged, driving the knife into his side. He let out a guttural scream, the mask slipping from his face to reveal cold, lifeless eyes. "Run, Jake," I shouted, my voice raw with desperation. "Get out of here." Jake scrambled to his feet, and we made a break for the door. The other masked figures were in disarray, their carefully controlled nightmare falling apart. We barreled down the corridor, the walls closing in around us. The adrenaline surged through my veins, dulling the pain and giving me the strength to keep moving. We burst out of the building, into the cold night air. The forest stretched out before us, a labyrinth of trees and darkness. We didn't stop to think, just ran, our footsteps pounding the ground as if our lives depended on it, because they did. The forest was a blur of shadows and moonlight, branches scratching at our faces and arms as we tore through the underbrush. The sounds of pursuit faded behind us, but we didn't dare slow down. We ran until our legs gave out, collapsing in a small clearing, gasping for breath. For a moment, we just lay there, staring up at the sky, the stars, a distant reminder of a world that felt impossibly far away. I turned to Jake, his face bruised and bloodied, but alive. "We did it," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "We got out." Jake nodded, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and disbelief. "Yeah, we did, but we're not safe yet. We need to keep moving." With great effort, we pulled ourselves to our feet, leaning on each other for support. We didn't know where we were going, but anywhere was better than that hellhole. The forest stretched out before us, a maze of darkness and uncertainty, but it was our only chance. Days passed in a blur as we made our way through the wilderness. We scavenged for food, drank from streams, and kept moving, always moving. We didn't dare return to civilization, not yet. The fear that they were still out there, watching, hunting us, was a constant shadow. Eventually, we stumbled upon a small town, far from anywhere we'd ever been. We were half-starved, dirty, and barely recognizable, but we were alive. We found a payphone and called the only person we could think of, Jake's cousin, the one who owned the cabin. He took us in, helped us clean up, and get back on our feet. We told him everything, and though he looked at us like we were crazy, he didn't question our story. He knew we'd been through something terrible. We stayed with him for a while, laying low, trying to piece our lives back together. The nightmares didn't stop, and the scars, both physical and mental, were a constant reminder of what we'd endured. But we were free, and that was all that mattered. Months passed, and we slowly began to rebuild our lives. We changed our names, our appearances, and moved far away, starting anew. The trauma of what we'd been through would never fully fade, but we had each other, and that gave us the strength to keep going. I don't know who the puppeteers were, or why they chose us. Maybe we were just unlucky, caught in their web of sadistic entertainment. But I do know one thing: we survived. We escaped their nightmare, and we were determined to never fall into their clutches again. If you're reading this, take it as a warning. Stay away from the dark corners of the internet, from the places where shadows lurk and monsters play. You never know what kind of horrors you might stumble upon, or what nightmares might be waiting for you. And if you ever see yourself on the screen, run, and never look back.